So are we misusing our power, and is that okay? So welcome to another topical talk with Theo Soutos and Andy T. Cumming, and today we are going to be talking about things that have been happening in the media an awful lot. Harvey Weinstein is one particular example, but and even politicians are talking about the way we actually misuse our power and how they're using it to actually get what they want. So, because the thing is, it's very natural for us to actually put self-interest first, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I should say good morning, everyone, as well. You're 100% correct. Of course, here comes my golden rule. People will do what you let them do. Number one thing, people do what you let them do. And that's why we need 3,500 new laws a year. Imagine that, 3,500 ways of becoming a criminal. Why? Because people are being boundaried less by their religion, their morals, their culture, their ethics, because what democracy does is it atomizes any kind of structure and any kind of human control. Take that away and you're left with absolutely no guidance whatsoever. That's why you need more laws.
It's actually quite an interesting one this week because I'm actually, as some of you well know, I'm actually writing my book at the moment. And one of the areas I was talking about is that human behaviour is actually very predictable. And all these people in power know how to use it to actually get what they want. You know, they see the rest of society in some way, something that they can actually control. And this is where the abuse comes in, is how you actually control those people. Because let's face it, from the day we were born, we've been controlled. Originally, we were controlled by our parents, who are controlled by the state. We then go to school, and we are controlled by the teachers. So we are being conditioned to behave and actually have to think along certain lines. So who decides that it's okay that to go and work in the city you should actually wear a suit and tie? Because society has led us that way. You know, the media tells us how to think. They manipulate us. Only now are we beginning to see the real deception behind how the media actually treat us. But overall, most people will still believe what we are being fed. Because you hear it on television, you hear it on the radio, therefore it must be true. Would you not say that?
And it's repetition. Same thing occurs in courts.
It's what Hitler did, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You repeat the lie big enough and people will believe it.
And
it's interesting,
actually. Same thing in court with barristers. Barristers will go guilty, and essentially the jury will begin believing it, even if it's not true.
Yes, I mean, it's interesting because you had Donald Trump, and he branded Hillary Clinton as Crooked Hillary, and he kept on saying Crooked Hillary, until it stuck. You know, this wasn't. It was designed. It was programmed into us. You know, you go to watch a television advert. Not so much these days, but watch a television advert, and you see it often enough, you'll believe what they actually tell you. It's interesting because I started doing intermittent fasting, and we were discussing who decided that we should have breakfast. Do you remember that?
Yes, absolutely.
Who decided we should have breakfast? And Theo turned around and said it was probably Kellogg's. All right? So they told us, I don't know who started it. They told us that breakfast was the most important meal of the day, or someone told us breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And now we actually hear it and say it all along.
In fact, you are absolutely right. If you listen to a very interesting guy who's a neuroendocrinologist called Robert Lustig, that's exactly what he says, and he talks about the huge conspiracy of the large corporations that deal with food. And what he talked about essentially was that in order to make money, you can't have fresh food because it's not a commodity, because you can't freeze a lot of fresh food. If you freeze an orange, all you get is mush when you thaw it. But if you remove all the fibre from it and you stick in a few emulsifiers and so on, you can freeze it, and then it becomes a commodity. And therefore, that's how that's the economics behind processed food and why it's being forced upon us.
This all reminds me of a story actually I heard, and it was when there was this lady who was cooking for her husband, and she had she got a piece of ham, and she topped and tailed it. She cut off one end and then cut off the other one, stuck it in the oven. And when the husband actually asked her, "Why do you do that?" she turns around and says, "Oh, I don't know. It's because my mother did it." So she goes and asks the mother why she actually cut off both ends of the ham before she put it in the pot, or in the oven rather. And the mother says, "Oh, sorry, I don't know. It's because my mother did it." So she goes and asks the mother, and so Mum, why did you actually cut off both ends of the ham? He says, "It's the only way I could get it to fit into the pot." And for some reason, you see things and behave things and see behaviours long enough. And you talk about mirror neurons a lot. And when we actually compute what we actually see to what we actually believe, that then actually becomes part of our internal representation as such.
What is tradition?
Well, I don't know. You're giving me another game show question here, which has got like about 20 different answers.
Well,
so
we talked very briefly about pleasure and happiness, and I remember I challenged the concept of happiness, and I said, well, actually, happiness is essentially peace of mind, being able to achieve contentment and peace of mind. Now, what humans have is our fundamental arousal or anxiety, which as cavemen kept us alive, and now hasn't changed. We're still cavemen, and it continues to drive us. And what cavemen eventually formed were colonies, were groups. For a group to function, it needs structure. So humans have evolved to require structure, and structure itself reduces anxiety. Therefore, tradition is just another form of structure which gives us contentment.
But who actually designs that structure?
In a way, it becomes immaterial because hold on a second. We talked about power today. So that structure has been created by someone for us to follow. That's the point. You see, the humans like tradition, or humans like structure, and tradition is one form of structure. And therefore, as I said, it's immaterial because people will stick to structure, often whether it's good or bad, because it makes them feel content.
And here's the difference, though, because you talk about structure. There's the people who actually create the structure who are in a position of power, and there's the people who actually follow it. And I know there's varying levels, and we've discussed this before. But you're talking about someone like Harvey Weinstein, who actually was in a position of power, abused his power, and the thing is, he did it on a very weak infrastructure. Of deceit and lies and dishonesty, and now it's come back to bite him on the arse. And it's
what he did,
a pariah now.
He worked on vested interest. In other words, people who came in accepted a certain amount of accepted that there will be a certain amount of this type of behaviour, but he just ramped it up a notch, and they agreed to enter consensually into this kind of interaction, assuming that they would further their careers. That's all it was.
They did, and they made that decision. Not all of them, because there are allegedly cases of rape. So I still live in a country where you're innocent before proven guilty. So there is alleged rape, and if he did that, he still used.
Not according to the media. Media loves saying it. They'll say
we don't know. We don't know. But if you use physical force, he uses power of physical force to coerce someone into sleeping with him. But anyway, this has thrown me now, because we talk about the use of power. But if you actually build it, if you actually use your power on a very weak infrastructure, it's like communism, for example. You build it on a very weak infrastructure where you're suppressing people, or squeezing them, and they don't like it because you're over controlling them. What's going to happen? Some people are eventually going to start breaking away from that, and when one or two people have actually broken through, you've created that little hole, and you know what that little hole can do. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and what happens is that's when it all falls down. It happened with communism. It happened in Iraq. It's a disaster now. It's happened with Harvey Weinstein. Just look back at history and you'll actually see it.
Okay, keep it simple. It's all about fear.
It's all about what?
It's all about fear. So what happens is
use coercion tactics.
All these regimes function through fear, and people reduce their fear by sticking to what they're told. Now, as soon as a regime shows you that it's not willing to enforce the structure that it requires of its citizens, and the citizens themselves are fundamentally unhappy, they have reduced fear for not maintaining the structure, and they will start doing something else.
I thought you were looking to keep this simple, because you've just lost me.
Put very simple, fear controls all our behaviour. So if you give enough fear to someone, they're going to do what they're told. As soon as these regimes show that they're not willing to apply the same level of fear to people, then people will be less bound by the regime, and they are more easily led out of it. That's all it is. If you are not fearful of the regime, the regime will control you less.
But if you have enough people who will challenge it, and this is what's happening with the Harvey Weinstein, because I bet something like 36 women have come forward. So as
they're not fearful anymore.
Well, they're not, because there is strength in numbers. I mean, the thing is, I think it's also 36 women who should be ashamed themselves for not having the strength to actually come forward.
Well, put it this way, if Harvey Weinstein is convicted of anything criminal, these women are also criminals, because according to French law, of course they're not in France, but if you allow crime to happen, then you are culpable. And these ladies kept quiet, knowing that he would continue that type of behaviour. Why? You're either moralistic and you do the right thing.
Well, you put yourself first.
Not thinking of the vested interest of your career. But they put their careers ahead of the well-being of other people.
But the thing is, I think most people will do that when it comes to the crunch. You know, you'll always put your family first. I mean, let's face it, if there's only one loaf of bread around, you will grab it for your family and let someone else starve. Because the thing is, we are conditioned to survive. Self-preservation. I'd like to think I wouldn't do that, but I can't say I wouldn't, and I think anyone would be lying if they said they would.
Okay, that's the power of authority. And for instance, there was a famous study of electrocuting people. Do you remember that?
Yes.
When people were recruited, and they were split into groups. One half were told to electrocute people for getting tests wrong. They couldn't see the person, they could only hear them. And they could hear when they were in pain. But of course the person in pain was making it up. And almost all of them went to a lethal dose of electrocution. The minority refused it and challenged it. And that is the power of authority. In other words, leadership. So if you respect leadership, if leadership makes you fearful enough, if it has enough status, then you will follow it, even if it's bad leadership.
And the thing is, you've got to be able to have the passion to actually follow it through, and the commitment to follow through. I mean, look what happened in France. You know, French Revolution challenged Louis. Wasn't it Louis? Challenged Louis. Mm-hmm. And France is now a republic. In this country, we had Oliver Cromwell, who challenged King Charles. Was it the first or the second? I keep forgetting. I think it was King Charles I, wasn't it?
Okay.
And he turned, but the thing is, he actually still believed in actually having a monarchy. So while Charles didn't actually control the country anymore, because he abused his power, the state then actually had far more power to inflict. Now it's gone in the other direction. So, you know, I see politicians, particularly on Question Time these days, and they come out with the most absurd things. And it's one reason I used to like Boris Johnson, but he's a guy who could potentially abuse his power because of the crap that he actually comes out with and what he says. And I suppose having gone to Eton and Oxford probably gives him a level of entitlement or entitlement belief.
So what crap does he come out with? What crap does he come out with?
Well, let's face it, he was in a position where he actually told... Well, you talk about Donald Trump, for example, and he says, oh, you know, the worst thing in New York is Donald Trump, for example, or something along those lines, which one, it shows him as unqualified to be a leader if he can't deal with that. But he's got a platform to be able to say that sort of stuff. But he tells people what they actually want to hear, but he doesn't follow through. So he's done a lot of clangers over the years. I feel sorry for if he ever goes for Prime Minister. I would never want to work on his campaign.
The thing is, he is so self-serving. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
And the thing is, he survives because he's funny. This is not even funny, and certainly doesn't consider the good of the people.
I mean, he wants to be prime minister because to actually fulfill his ego. That's right, to stroke his ego. That's what it is.